Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Public health emergencies are here to stay, according to CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky, her testimony before the Senate yesterday.
Experts had warned for years that a pandemic of this scale was coming, and we must expect additional diseases to emerge. We need to ask ourselves, are we ready? We must have a strong infrastructure that can identify and detect outbreaks at their source and can take quick action before diseases take hold. Over the last 12 years, the United States has faced 4 significant emerging infectious disease threats: the H1N1 influenza pandemic, Ebola, Zika, and COVID-19. We also confronted a drug overdose epidemic, with nearly 500,000 people dying from an opioid-related overdose between 1999 and 2019. This increase continued into 2020 and appeared to accelerate during the COVID-19 pandemic. These experiences show that public health emergencies are here to stay.
Mm-hmm. You know what's interesting about that rundown she gave,
What?
including drug addiction, drug overdoses.
Yeah, why do you think there's a correlation between lockdowns and drug overdoses?
No, that's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is you're talking about viruses that have nothing to do, very little to do with individual action. And you're talking about drug addiction, which has everything to do with individual behavior. Remember, this is an agency that has also declared racism a public health concern. How quickly could that go from a concern to an emergency? Seems to me that there's more behind this than just ticking off the viruses of recent memory. For more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined again by Theodore Dalyrmple, contributing editor of City Journal, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and author of False Positive, A Year of Error, Omission, and Political Correctness in the New England Journal of Medicine. Theodore Dalrymple, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking me.
What about Dr. Walensky's rundown and her summation that public health emergencies are here to stay, the implications of that?
Well, of course, there have always been public health emergencies from time to time. The conflating of opiate or opioid overdoses with viruses is, as you said, absolutely ludicrous. And you might as well say that, I don't know, a flood is a public health emergency. Well, it is a public health emergency afterwards, but it isn't in itself a public health emergency. So I think what it indicates is a desire for a kind of takeover of society by public health doctors and their bureaucratic sidekicks.
Yeah, they like the presence and the effective authority they've enjoyed. It seems to me, they can call it guidance, they can call it a suggestion, they can call it best practices, they can call it whatever they want. But when you have everybody fold in to do exactly what their guidance suggests, then they're de facto in charge.
Yes, and it'll become law as well. The thing is that what one reads, in a way, it's natural in medical journals. There's never any countervailing consideration. So if, for example, you were able to show that riding bicycles results in 10 broken legs, that would be a justification for stopping people from riding bicycles.
Right.
And never do you see a countervailing argument or consideration. That's what is sinister about this.
When we spoke with you a previous time, maybe midpoint in the last year, you had just written a piece about sort of and I should mention for people not familiar with your work. Number one, they should be familiar with it based on your appearance on the show. Number two, get familiar with it. But that you're a retired prison psychiatrist, so you're a medical professional yourself. And you wrote this piece about the response from the citizenry to the COVID-19 responses from the policymakers. And this idea that there was, among those who were enthusiastic about the lockdowns and all the restrictions, there was this notion you suggested of frisson, that people were excited to feel like they were in this existential fight. They were overcoming something important, even where the risk was relatively minor. It could be exciting because the legitimate fear was relatively low, so they could sort of have performative fear for the purposes of signaling they were a good person and they're doing something important and they're part of doing something important. I wonder now as we see people vaccinated. So, and the same policymakers saying vaccination makes you more or less safe. You still want to wear a mask, go ahead, wear a mask, but you can more or less resume your pre-pandemic life. And yet still, according to some survey research, more than half of those who are vaccinated refuse to partake in those customary activities they partook in before the pandemic, things like going to a restaurant, going to a movie, going to a sporting event. What's the psychology, do you think? Is it still the same or is it nuanced?
Well, I think the fact is that we've been subjected to a lot of arguments about possibilities, none of which is, all of which are actually possible. I mean, it's possible, for example, that the Indian variant will turn out to be much worse than the other variants. It's possible. One cannot say in advance of experience that it isn't possible. And it's possible that the vaccines won't protect against it to the same degree as against the other variants. So all these things are possible, and possibilities are raised. And once they're raised, it's very difficult to eradicate them from the human mind. 50 years ago, I remember reading that eating green potatoes increased the number of cases of spina bifida, obviously not among men, but amongst babies of pregnant women who ate green potatoes. I cannot, to this day, 50 years later, I cannot look at a green potato without thinking about spina bifida. So it's very easy to insinuate a danger into the public mind and very difficult to get it out again.
Well, what is life like in London now in regards to
Well, I'm
COVID?
in Paris at the moment.
Okay.
In Paris. Well, it looks a lot more normal than it did a little while ago. I mean, the terraces are open, so people are eating and drinking. I would, but there's still a curfew at 9 o'clock. So after 9 o'clock, the streets are completely empty, and they're empty until 6 o'clock in the morning.
What about the quality? We were just talking about this with a guest in the last hour about the sort of the quality of life, what the reality on the ground is in New York City. Obviously, we have first-person account here in Chicago. What's the quality of like in Paris now versus pre-pandemic?
Well, obviously, an enormous amount has been lost of city life. In fact, what has happened really is that living in a city is now a disadvantage by comparison with living in the country, because none of the things that made city life worth living in and worth commuting in, and all the traffic and noise and so on, all the things that made that compensated for all those things have disappeared. So there are no theatres, there are no cinemas, there's no eating inside. At least now we have eating outside. There are no exhibitions, and the exhibitions are going to open again, but of course they're going to open as if they were tours in leprosaria. So
that'll really bring the city back to its pre-pandemic heights. Well, here's some good news for you. The EU looks like they're going to okay foreign travel to the vaccinated. So we'll have some ugly Americans coming over to take pictures of the Eiffel Tower in short order this summer.
With white gym shoes and fanny
well,
packs.
if they dare.
Right, exactly. Well, no, exactly. That's where it's at. Just continuing on this sort of the status of the big metropolises. You wrote this book review of a book on homelessness called No Way Home recently. Among the authors of this is Chris Rufo, a friend of the show.
Yes.
And one of the things, a couple of things you say, I wanted just to have you develop a little bit more, because we have tent cities in Chicago, like are featured in all the big cities more prominently than they were pre-pandemic right now. Homelessness is a syndrome rather than a disease, you write. What does that mean?
Well, it means it's caused by more than one thing, and in different places, it's different people being homeless. So, for example, if you go to London, where there are homeless people, of course, what is perhaps rather surprising is that if homelessness were just the result of poverty and nothing else, you would expect people who came from impoverished ethnic minorities to be homeless. But it is not they who are homeless, rather it is the whites, and not necessarily whites who come from the worst homes. On the other hand, if you go to Paris, what you see is encampments under flyovers and along the road to the airport. I mean, real bidonvilles, real shanty towns. And these are immigrants of various kinds, usually illegal immigrants. So, although both groups of people are homeless, they're not homeless for exactly the same reasons. And I presume that is true in America too, but I don't actually know that.
Well, yeah, that's the indication, certainly of including from some of the authors that are part of that collaborate in this book, No Way Home, who've looked at California and other big cities. Something else that you write about this too, sort of this is a sort of a larger cultural comment, and it seems to me a key one. You reference this notion of obedience to the unenforceable, and the failure to be obedient to the unenforceable, which I'll let you describe, results in one of two extremes, neither of which are freedom-oriented societies.
Yes, well, I mean, the fact is that a lot of what we do is just ordinary good manners and good behavior, which is not enforceable at law. So that, for example, being polite to one another is not enforceable. No law could force us to be polite to one another. So if we're not prepared to be polite to one another, if there is no internal compulsion from upbringing and culture to be polite, then we will have a society of people who are not polite, who are impolite, or even aggressive. A particular bête noire of mine is in England. I see young people putting their feet up on the seats in trains. I don't know whether that happens in Chicago, but it's very difficult. You're not going to enforce people. You're not going to have police going around stopping people doing that. So if they don't feel that they should obey a rule which either has no fundamental reason for it, no reason that they accept as being fundamental, or is not enforced, then decent civilized life is destroyed. And that is happening in many countries.
Right. You suggest that, and you see this, I mean, in the most sort of grotesque fashions, including people using the streets as a public toilet. And you go one of two directions. If you're just going to say everybody's just living out their chosen behavior and there are no standards, you either go to anarchy, which places like Los Angeles have chosen, or you go to tyranny. So, you can have those laws enforced, but it's going to be a policeman, on every other seat on that train. And either way, you're talking about a dystopian future.
Yes. Yes, and no one, I mean, a society in which people only behave with reasonable decency is because they fear that there's a policeman around the corner who will arrest them if they don't behave decently. That would be a terrible society. But a society in which nobody behaved decently anyway would also be a terrible society.
Two sides of the same coin. Theodore Dalrymple, contributing editor of City Journal, senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, the book, False Positive, A Year of Error, Omission, and Political Correctness in the New England Journal of Medicine. Theodore Dalrymple, thanks as always for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer.